Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. Today we're going to be talking about math and libraries, and I, for one, am excited. This has been a long time coming, and I look forward to it. I look forward to discussing all things we're going to discuss here, which, for the record, everything that I'm going to say can be expanded and expounded upon, but I'm also going to be looking forward to what you might be able to add to the conversation, which it could add to the conversation. Either way, right? Here's how this video is going to go. It's going to go in some ways that you may expect, but some other ways that you may not. We're going to talk about libraries, what they are, and what they are at their core, and what they've become as a result of that. And we're going to talk, of course, how math is there along the way, but also about some resources that libraries provide, because libraries are like insane, right? They're information hubs, but they're also just like resource hubs, and among other things, and that's really cool, right? So we're gonna get into all these things and more, and some of these things you might actually already know. In which case, it's gonna be a reminder to some of y'all, but for a lot of other people, it may be new information. But either way, I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope you either learn something like directly, or you walk away with a different perspective. Either way, I am ready. Let's get into it. So, with libraries, if we talk about what they are, how they started, what they've been traditionally, we can then lead into what they are at their core and expand from there and talk about different types and talk about, again, the math of it all. So, with libraries, like traditionally, they've been a collection of books, and this collection could be hosted in a building, and over time, it's become more than that. But keep that initial part in mind, right? And when it comes to those books, what are they? Among other things, they are information. And from that core, and with the advent of technology, we see that libraries not only contain, books, but also various forms of media, right? Because it could be music, could be shows, movies, games, articles, and any other number of written work. It could be just so many things, and I'm thinking just on that broader scale. So if we start to branch out from that, again, we'll talk about the math along the way, but I wanted to kind of give a breakdown of libraries first, right? And so you have the basic idea of libraries being like a collection of books, and that could be also in a building, and has been the case in many cases. Sorry, there was a better way to say that. In many situations, that's been the case. But libraries, they could be public, they could be private, they could be school libraries, they could be your own personal library. And the idea is you go from that basic definition, like collection of books, to collection of media, collection of information, and kind of go from there. And I think that's really cool. And like it may or may not shock you, but like I grew up as a library kid, and it was always something that was like cool to me. And libraries have been like in and out of my life in that public sense, but I've always had fond memories, right? Because it's like not only did I like frequent libraries when I was a kid, I also volunteered at libraries, both like school libraries as well as the public library, and so that was really fun. And so if we start there before expanding into some other points that I want to make, if you think about the building, like if we're talking about a public library, let's focus on that for a second. Like you have a public library, and here's the thing about math, it's everywhere and it's in everything. And just in that building alone, we could start getting into some things before we even get to the books and before we even get to the other like forms of media, right? So you have a building, and it's something that's inherently mathematical. Because not only are we dealing with the construction and the math therein, dealing with the various shapes and material and building, that library in the context of whatever space that we have. Like not only do we have math in that sense, and like thinking about all the dimensions and the different floors and how everything is going to be situated, but we're also dealing with math in addition to that building and construction, right? And how and what we can do. And then if you do jump in to like just focusing on the books for a second, right? You have those books stored usually on shelves. And so you have to design those shelves. You have to decide how those books are going to go onto that shelf. And you have to decide um, the layout of that library in general, and then if you bring other media in, how that's all going to work and operate. And back to those books, and again, this can be expanded to other media. You have different classification systems that you can have. The idea being that you're cataloging this information, right? You're cataloging these books, you're cataloging these different forms of media, you're indexing things as you go. You're trying to find the best way to keep track of it all. And different libraries are going to use different classification systems. A really popular one is the Dewey Decimal System, but it's like it's not the only one. But the idea ends up being the same. It's like we're using math to organize, right? No matter how you cut it, whether you're using those numbers directly or not, right? However, you're categorizing things is like you're using math, right? You're focused on that information and what it's conveying to you in the positions that's going to be, oh, sorry, that they're going to be in your catalog. Um, and again, right, you can think about it in terms of books first, but then you can expand that to larger forms of media. Or, sorry, that's not exactly what I want to say. Other forms of media, because books are large, but so are other forms of media. I don't want to get too distracted by that, but you get where I'm going with this, right? Um, and so you just like you have this idea of just on a base level, uh, you have like this information and how it's stored and where it's stored, and that's something that's inherently mathematical. But so is like the idea of what you're creating with that media and how you access that, right? Like each of the things that you're dealing with is mathematical in nature. Like let's just say like a book, for instance, right? Like with that book, you are dealing with the dimensions of that book. You're dealing with how long that book is, and if you were dealing with the author, like they had to put in the time, the energy, and effort to construct that book, how they wanted to construct that book, and how that information is going to get to you. And we don't always think about it, but just that idea of writing a book and having that published and having that be in a library is something that's like mathematical from start to finish. And again, like we don't always talk about that. And you can also extend that idea to other forms of media. And the thing too is that like okay, so far I've like largely talked about like physical media, right? That's the idea that I wanted to convey just to start. But it's like times have changed, things have evolved. We have like digital options, and libraries have been on top of that, right? Like there's digital libraries, there's ways for you to not only access the library like physically but also digitally, right? And there's so many resources that come with that. And if we continue focusing on the public library for a second, like there's different types of public libraries out there. Some are like there to like lend you out the books, and other ones are there where they have the books just purely for reference. Like the books don't leave the building. Um, but a lot of libraries, it's both, right? Like they'll have systems in place so that you can use your library card to borrow books for a set amount of time, and get your book back in time to avoid fees, right? Like, and if you do that, it is free for you to borrow that book, right? And that's something that's inherently mathematical too. You're dealing with time and money, you can't not deal with math. But that's not the only thing, right? Like if you jump to the reference size, like you cannot take the books out of the building, but you can use them for the time that you're in the library. And I think that's cool. And I will circle back to public libraries, but I wanted to say, actually, you know what? No, scratch that. Let's keep on talking about public libraries and then expand into other types. So here's the thing. So with libraries, like public libraries, and what a lot of them have become over time, there are a lot of physical and digital resources, but that's not all. There's so many libraries that have different resources in addition to those. And if it was just the idea of like, having these like books and other form of media for you to like borrow or look at, that'd be one thing. And that is nothing short of amazing. But again, like things have evolved over time. There are plenty of libraries that have passport services, that have tax services, and resources. And those resources could be for the taxes in particular, right? It could be information on how to file them. But if your situation meets certain qualifications, they could help you file them directly. And potentially for free. It depends on the library, it depends on the situation. But my whole big thing is like, you might not have expected the tax part to be part of a library or the passport part. And I gotta say, like, I got my passport through a library. And that was cool, because they made it clear like what documentation you needed and everything, and you met at the time, took the picture, they mailed it off, you paid what you needed to pay, and it was good. But yeah, so you have passport services, tax resources. If you're starting your own business, you might be able to find some resources out there for that. There are creation stations, preservation stations, and just to talk about both of those a little bit, like if you're someone and you're creating something, you might be able to find some resources at libraries, and there are some libraries out there that actually have like 3D printers, which is insane, which you could use. Again, it depends on the library, it depends on the situation, but it's out there. For preservation stations, some of those exist out there, and the idea is to digitize like various items, right? Like you might have some old photos or some old videos, and there might be resources in that preservation station that allow you to be able to back things up digitally, and that's cool. And I like that idea. You might also have some libraries that have recording studios, which that's really cool. Because it's like, well, maybe you got a podcast to produce, or maybe you want to produce a song and you need a space for it, right? So that's an option. And I like all that because it's like in and of itself is really cool. But each of those things that I mentioned and so many other things, they're inherently mathematical too. Because you're dealing with passports, you're dealing with flight, you're dealing with everything that comes along with that flight. You're dealing with money, you're dealing with distances, you're dealing with speed, you're dealing with time, and just like how all that's going to be organized and what it can allow you to do. And with taxes, I mean, it's all about the money there, and so having resources so you can get your best like return, is good. And things just like recording, like every bit of that is math at the end of the day, right? Because like if you're recording music, for instance, right? Like sound itself is mathematical in the properties that come along with it, right? And music being an extension of that is no exception. And it's just like we figured out a lot of ways to be able to do so much with all of that. And whether we're talking about just like being in that space and taking that time, or the finer points of constructing music, it is there, right? The math. And the same could be said for if you were just like recording a podcast, because like you're concerned with location, position, your sound, your volume, your tone, the time that you have like the studio for, and so many other things, and that all boils down to math, and we don't necessarily think about that, but it's true. And there's so many other resources too. Like there's no shortage of them. I just mentioned a few, which some of you may knew, but sorry, you may have known about, and some you might not have known about. Um, but so continuing that, like public resources, oh, sorry, public library are a great source of resources and information, and librarians, they're doing a lot out there because like they're guiding you through that information for sure, but they're also constructing the systems that you're using to pursue that information, right? There's a lot that's done with that library science, that information science, with like the documentation, the management, the library classification systems that come about. There's so many things that librarians and like library scientists are doing out there that make things not only interesting but more convenient, right? Like I feel like you have the idea that there's a curation on that larger scale with how that library is presented to you in that public facing sense, but also like the individual level when a librarian is helping you directly, right? And so I think that takes, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and in some cases money. And that's really cool that we have people out there so willing to do that and help people navigate information in this world. It's dope, right? And so you have all that, and then you have the idea of you know private libraries, because you might have like different businesses or organizations that might have their own libraries, and maybe it's for people that work there or people that are members of this place or that place. And the idea is like it's gonna be different from a public library, but it's still a collection of books, a collection of media, a collection of information, and accessing that and storing that, it's all mathematical. And of course, there's the idea of like personal libraries, right? Because you might have your own collection of, books, of movies, of, games, of like everything, right? And then you might have collections that you're perusing when you're looking for entertainment or information. And no matter what, you're putting in time, you're putting in energy, you're putting in effort, and sometimes money, and it's all mathematical in nature. And this isn't even counting like all like the different like math books out there, right? Because there's a lot of those which you can get through libraries or might be you have in your personal collection. Um, But my whole thing is just like there's a lot, and so as we begin to close things out, because I don't want to go on this, sorry, for this for too long, because I already feel like there's a lot of information to take in. I do want to talk about my personal experience with libraries. I spilled some tea. I want to talk about my personal experience with libraries and how that's factored into my life, and how I'm dealing with personal libraries, right? So if we're looking at, and we can start with the public library and like school library for starters. So when I was a kid, right, like I was, definitely in and out of libraries a lot. Like in the school library, it was like really cool because like one of the things that I didn't really get to mention before, but is definitely like the case, is that if you don't have the internet, right, a library can be a really great place to be able to use that, right? You have to be careful, of course, what you look up, but the idea is like it is a resource. Like the internet is a powerful thing, and you could go to your public library and be able to use the resources they have there. You can use the computers, you can use um, the internet. And I think back to when I was a kid, one of the cool things, like if we start with that school library part, is um, you know we of course dealt with books there, in that traditional sense. But like I I was born in the 80s, grew up in, that time, but also most of the, sorry, not most of the 90s. I grew up in a bit of the 80s, all of the 90s, and some of the early 2000s. And so I remember being young in the early 90s, and with computers being more, available, and the librarians at my school, like they were ahead of time, and they were big on having classes to use the computers and use the internet to navigate like library resources, and that was dope. And to the public library, my parents took me and my like sibling there when we were young, and a lot, like, and we got to explore all different types of books, like both fiction and nonfiction, and just spend time in that library just exploring. And that was really cool. And I remember, like, there was like the sneaks program back in the day, and I was part of that, and that was fun. And I also volunteered at the public library as well as the school library, because it's just like I got, like, we had to do, I don't know if it's like this in every place, but like in a lot of places in America, you got to do your community service hours, like, over the course of your school career. And so I started that process early and did my volunteer hours at the libraries, and just I had a good old time. Um, and then, the libraries have been like in and out of my life in various formats. In college, they definitely were a bigger thing, because it's like in elementary, middle school, and high school, they were big. But then in college, it was kind of different, because it's like it was less for fun, and more for like school purposes. Because it's like you go to your different colleges, and they usually will have like some pretty crazy libraries, like you can find nonfiction there, but they usually have some pretty like great like academic libraries there. And so that was a big part of that, right? And then like in my adult life, it's been like in and out. Now what's interesting is my work life with that, because there was a point on time, like for several years, where I ran a math and science tutoring center. And what's interesting about that, well, several things, but the big thing is like the location was important. And dealing with location, we're dealing with math, among other things. And just like the idea of like running a math and science tutoring center, and all of like the logistics and utter insanity that came along with that. Which, for the record, most of that insanity was welcome. But I bring it up though because like we were located in like a library. Now, before my time running the center, it used to be at the bottom of the library, which, as you can imagine, um, impacts like the number of people coming in. um, but then, like when I took it over, right? Like at that point, we were in the front of the building. Like we were in the front of the library, not super far off from the entrance. So it's like before you got to that rest of the library, you could see like the math and science tutoring center. You could see like the writing center and all of that, and get like help, free help. And if you didn't like the idea of just saying, "Oh, it's free help, so I can take it or leave it," it's like we could pay to go to a place. So it's like get more bang for your buck, right? You could look at it that way. And Having us be on not only on the first floor but like close to the entrance, that was helpful. Like, the location matters, and like we were able to like have some wonderful tutors, and we were able to have a lot of people come in and get help, and like having that library space was just like such a cool thing, because not only are you there, the students coming in for that tutoring and saying, oh well, they can stick around for for a while, they can stick in that like area and that space that we've had reserved for us, but they could also go into different spots in the library, or like they could be going before and then come to tutoring. They can do anything they really wanted with that, and so it was nice to have that, and to like have the library be part of the world in a different way, you know? And then, of course, like with departments, you have different libraries, like, and with math, of course, there's no shortage of that, like different books and like articles, journals, and all that good stuff. And then, like, on a personal level, like, I've had offices where like I was able to collect different like math textbooks and different education books and stuff like that, just like have there that I enjoyed or that I found useful as a reference. And so it's just like you can build your library, your department can have your library, your school can have another library. There's like there's layers to it. But moving as we like draw to a close, right? Like with libraries, we were dealing with these collections, and whether we're talking about books, games, songs, shows, um, movies or more, those collections have these different elements to them, and how we use them, how we categorize them, it is all math. And I think that's really cool. And the idea of just like where these collections are stored, whether they're stored in a building or on a server, and how you access everything, that's math too. And like the cost, the idea of like um are you being able to use these resources for free? If it's not a public library, it's like, oh well, maybe you have to pay, right? Or if it's a school, you're already paying, right? And then there's the idea of just like again, that's math, and just at every conceivable level, that is what I see. And that's again not counting like math shows or movies or games, because they all exist, or books, because again that exists too. um, so it's just like there's so many layers to it and so many things that you could talk about, and I encourage you to add to the conversation. And I like one of the things that I would like to do, among other things, in the future, is I'd like to get my books in like libraries, so like people could access those for free, because like I have my like my oh wow, you know what, this video isn't done. It's not closing like I was thinking, because there's a few more things that I want to talk about. So one, like I have all my videos like on they're all like on YouTube, and then like various other platforms, but YouTube is the most extensive collection, and I have over 4,000 videos. That's my personal library for that, like for my work, and there's a lot of time that goes into that, in the discussions on math and so many other topics, right, that are pertaining to that in life. And so that's all free. Then I do have books where if people want to buy them, whether electronically or hard copy, they can, right? So it's like, hey, you can go the physical or electronic route. I got that covered for affordable prices. And with a library, though, it's like, hey, if you still can't do that, it's like, hey, if I can get some books into some libraries, then people can do that for free. But even if I'm not there yet, and even if people don't or haven't, you know, bought this book or that book, or maybe they just can't afford it, even although I try my best to like get that cost down, it's like the videos are out there too. So it's just like I like that idea that it's like, hey, I have my own library of this and that, and I want to get things into other libraries. But before we close, though, I do want to talk about video game libraries, because, like, that's dope, right? Because I have my own personal library, and you can make an argument that we have different libraries for different consoles, and then your overall library, and there's like just so many games in mine, and then you could talk about how different companies and different consoles have their own libraries, because like when I think about like crazy video game libraries, I PS2 is one of the most like insane libraries to me. And yes, you can get those games on other systems at this point, but I'm talking about just like games that came out from that era. To me, that was the best, right? Some people have argued like PlayStation, or some people might argue like various like Nintendo consoles. Um, Maybe some even argue Genesis out there. I don't know, but like for me, yeah, PS2, like it's a crazy library to this day. I dig it, and there's just so much more that you could say about all that. But I did just want to reference that because it's like it's cool because you might not think about libraries in that sense, but yeah, those are collections of video games. So it's just like whether you're talking about your own personal collection or the ones on a console or of a given era, or just in general, like for different companies, right? And then when you think about like video game libraries on the whole, like that's a whole another bonkers thing. And I'm hoping over time they are preserved better. With all that being said, I hope you learned something about libraries. This ended up going on longer than I thought, but it also makes a lot of sense. And whether you learn something about libraries, learn something about math, or were reminded of things, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you added something to the conversation. I'll see you in the future. Professor Prime out.